In a time when black voices were pushed to the margins, Marcus Garvey spoke to the world with clarity and confidence. He didn't chase wealth or comfort. He built ideas, movements, and a vision that traveled farther than any fortune. From newspapers to ships, from speeches to symbols, Garvey imagined a future where black people defined their own destiny. His life wasn't about luxury, but about purpose, and that purpose still echoes today. To understand how one man shaped a global legacy, we have to return to where it all began. From the quiet shores of St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, the journey of Marcus Garvey began far from power, privilege, or protection. Born on August 17, 1887, in the small coastal town of St. Ann's Bay, Marcus Garvey entered a world already stacked against him. Jamaica at the time was a British colony where skin color quietly but firmly decided a person's place in life. As a black child of African descent, Garvey stood at the bottom of that hierarchy. His family history carried deep scars. His great-grandfather had been born into slavery, and even his surname, Garvey, was inherited from former slave owners of Irish origin. Garvey's father, Marcus Garvey, worked as a stonemason and was known for his independent thinking and love of books. His mother, Sarah Richards, was a domestic servant and the daughter of farmers, grounded in discipline and resilience. Though not wealthy by colonial standards, the family lived slightly better than many nearby peasants. More importantly, their household valued knowledge, self-respect, and hard work. That foundation mattered. Formal education, however, was limited. Marcus attended a local church school until the age of 14, when financial reality ended his classroom years. But learning didn't stop. It simply changed form. In 1901, he became an apprentice to his godfather, a local printer. The printing press introduced him to words, ideas, and the quiet power of information. By 1904, when the business expanded to Port Maria, Garvey traveled daily from St. Ann's Bay to work, absorbing not only the trade but the rhythms of working-class life. In 1905, he moved to Kingston, Jamaica's capital, boarding in Smith Village, a densely populated working-class area. There, he found work at the Benjamin P.A. Production Company's printing department. His discipline and skill stood out. In a society still dominated by colonial prejudice, Garvey rose quickly, becoming the company's first African-Jamaican foreman, a rare and significant achievement that gave him both confidence and clarity. Then came disaster. In January 1907, a massive earthquake tore through Kingston, leveling buildings and shattering lives. Garvey, his mother, and his sister were forced to sleep outdoors for months, surrounded by rubble and uncertainty. The quake exposed more than broken structures. It revealed how fragile security was for ordinary people, and how quickly society abandoned the most vulnerable. That experience hardened Garvey's resolve. He became deeply involved in labor organizing, rising to vice president of the typesetters section of the Printers Union. In November 1908, he played a leading role in a major printing workers' strike. The strike was crushed. Garvey was fired. From that moment on, he was labeled a troublemaker and effectively blacklisted from private employment. Temporary work at a government printing press kept him afloat, but the message was clear. Speaking up had consequences. Instead of retreating, Garvey leaned forward. His anger wasn't reckless, it was focused. He began to see inequality not as personal misfortune, but as a system designed to keep people in place. In 1910, he joined the National Club, Jamaica's first nationalist organization, and soon became its first assistant secretary. The group challenged colonial authority, calling for the removal of Governor Sidney Olivier and opposing the importation of Indian indentured laborers, whom they believed were being used to undercut local workers. By July 1914, standing on Jamaican soil that had shaped both his anger and his vision, Marcus Garvey co-founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League, UNIA, alongside Amy Ashwood. What began as a local organization in Kingston carried an ambition that reached far beyond the island. Garvey wasn't interested in reforming a broken system from the inside. He wanted unity among people of African descent everywhere, pride in Black identity, economic independence, and ultimately a future where Africa stood strong under Black leadership. The idea of return to Africa was not just physical relocation, it was psychological freedom. 2 years later, in 1916, Garvey took a leap that would define his legacy. He arrived in New York City with almost nothing in his pockets, but with a message he believed the world was ready to hear. Harlem became his new base. By 1917 and 1918, UNIA chapters were spreading rapidly. What made Garvey different wasn't just his ideas, it was his presence. He spoke with confidence, spectacle, and clarity. He organized marches, ceremonies, and mass meetings. He gave people titles, uniforms, symbols. In a society that had stripped Black people of dignity, Garvey restored it publicly. By the early 1920s, UNIA had exploded into what many historians consider the largest organized Black mass movement in history. Hundreds of branches appeared across the United States, the Caribbean, Central America, and Africa. Millions claimed membership or support. His newspaper, The Negro World, launched in 1918, traveled wherever Black communities lived, carrying messages of self-determination and pride. Garvey even proclaimed himself President-in-Chief of Africa, a title meant not as vanity, but as defiance in a world that denied Black leadership altogether. At the height of this momentum, Garvey pushed beyond words into enterprise. In 1919, he launched the Black Star Line, a Black-owned shipping company meant to symbolize economic power, global trade, and connection to Africa. Working-class supporters bought shares, believing they were investing not just in ships, but in possibility. Though plagued by mismanagement and operational problems, the Black Star Line became one of the most powerful symbols of Black ambition in the 20th century. Garvey expanded the vision through the Negro Factories Corporation in 1920, which aimed to support Black-owned businesses and manufacturing. UNIA itself fostered culture and community. Schools, religious institutions, and partnerships with the African Orthodox Church emerged, reinforcing identity alongside economics. But success brought resistance. Some Black leaders, including Webb Du Bois and organizations like the NAACP, openly criticized Garvey's separatist ideas and leadership style. More dangerously, the U.S. government viewed his influence as a threat. In 1922, Garvey was prosecuted for mail fraud connected to the promotion of Black Star Line stock. Convicted, he was sentenced to federal prison. Until 1927, President Calvin Coolidge commuted his sentence, but freedom came with exile. Garvey was deported to Jamaica as an unwelcome foreigner, cut off from the movement he had built in America. Back home, he refused to disappear. He attempted to revive UNIA and entered politics, founding the People's Political Party in 1929 and briefly serving as a city councilor. Financial pressure and declining influence eventually pushed him again to move, this time to London in 1935. There, he continued to write, speak, and organize, though the world around him had shifted. His strong anti-socialist views isolated him from other Black intellectuals of the era. Then in 1937, his wife and children joined him in England, settling near Kensington Gardens. Garvey toured Canada and the Caribbean, preaching and fundraising, attending UNIA conferences in Toronto. Even in decline, he kept moving. Even when criticized, such as during his outspoken opposition to oil workers' strikes in Trinidad, he stayed true to his beliefs, regardless of who disagreed. By the late 1930s, the movement no longer commanded the crowds it once did. But the ideas had already escaped control. They lived on, in pan-africanism, in later civil rights leaders, in independence movements across Africa and the Caribbean. And behind this public firestorm of ideas and movements was a man with a private world rarely discussed, To understand Marcus Garvey fully, we now turn inward, to his personal life, his family, his relationships, and the human cost of carrying a global vision. Garvey married twice, and both marriages connected him to women who were not simply companions, but activists in their own right. His first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, was a pioneering pan-Africanist and a fierce advocate for women's rights. They met in Jamaica around 1914, at a moment when Garvey's ideas were just beginning to take shape. They married quietly on Christmas Day in 1919 in New York, followed by a large public celebration that reflected Garvey's rising profile. But the union struggled under pressure, distance, and accusation. Allegations of adultery surfaced, and Garvey sought an annulment. By 1922, the marriage had ended, another personal cost of a life lived under constant strain. That same year, Garvey married again, this time to Amy Jacques Garvey, a woman who would become inseparable from his legacy. Formerly his secretary and closest representative, she had already proven herself as an organizer, editor, and strategist within UNIA. Their marriage was not built on spectacle, but on endurance. Amy Jacques Garvey stood beside him through prison, exile, and decline. She edited his writings, kept the movement alive during his absence, and after his death, worked tirelessly to preserve and defend his ideas when others dismissed or distorted them. Together, they had 2 sons, and together they carried the weight of a collapsing empire of ideas. Financial hardship followed Garvey almost everywhere. His vision was vast, but the tools available to him were fragile. Enterprises like the Black Star Line, the Negro Factories Corporation, and the broader UNIA operations raised large sums from ordinary supporters who believed deeply in the dream of black economic independence. But ambition outpaced infrastructure. Ships were overpriced and unreliable. Operating costs soared. Management faltered. By around 1922, the Black Star Line collapsed, triggering legal consequences that would alter Garvey's life forever. His 1923 conviction for mail fraud, related to the sale of stock, sent him to federal prison. Though his sentence was later commuted, the damage was lasting. UNIA struggled under debt, dwindling membership, and fractured leadership. What Garvey had built with words and vision proved difficult to sustain in the harsh reality of global economics and political hostility. In 1935, seeking space to regroup, Garvey moved to London. There, he continued to write and speak, but the world had changed. New ideologies competed for attention. His anti-socialist views left him isolated from other black intellectuals. Health problems began to surface. In January 1940, Garvey suffered a serious stroke. Around the same time, a Chicago newspaper published a premature and deeply negative obituary, describing him as forgotten and alone. Garvey reportedly read it. Soon after, he suffered another stroke. Within weeks, he was gone. He died in relative isolation during the early months of World War II, which prevented the immediate return of his remains to Jamaica. He was first buried quietly in London, far from the land that shaped him. For a time, it seemed as though history might leave him there. But ideas do not die that easily. In 1964, 2 years after Jamaica gained independence, Garvey's remains were finally returned home in a state ceremony. He was reburied with full national honors at what is now National Heroes Park in Kingston. That same year, he was declared Jamaica's first national hero. The man once exiled and dismissed was formally recognized as foundational. Today, Marcus Garvey is honored across the world. Each year on August 17th, his birthday is marked by ceremonies, lectures, and wreath-laying in Jamaica and throughout the African diaspora. His life reminds us of a hard truth. That vision often comes before comfort, and legacy often arrives late. Garvey did not live to see the full reach of his influence, but generations after him continued to walk paths he imagined first. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey of vision, sacrifice, and belief. If this video moved you, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. We're grateful to have you with us, and we'll see you in the next story.